Have you ever wondered how to create items for 3D printing but don't even know where to begin? Well, today I'm going to show you how I produce some of my small items, such as earrings or keychains, using a software called Shapr3D. I like Shapr3D because not only is it available on both Windows and Mac, but it's also a software that is fully functional on an iPad Pro, which makes it easy for me because sometimes I like to move my setup around a little bit. Today we're going to create these really cute bee earrings, or you can make them into a keychain as well. And I hope that you'll be able to take some tips and tricks away from this. And with that being said, let's get started.
So one of the first things that I will typically do when I'm trying to come up with a new product design is to kind of sketch out my thoughts. I'll usually come up with a general idea, and then I'll break it down a little bit and try and draw it from every angle. I do this partly because this can then be transferred over into my modeling program, and I can use these shapes as a form of reference. It may seem like an extra task to do this, but it really makes things much easier down the line. Now I head over to Shapr3D, my modeling software of choice. I tap Add and then Image, and then I'm going to bring in the sketch that I created over in Procreate and just get it into position where I want it on the axis. I often play around with this, but ultimately, usually I just try to center it on the XY axis just out of habit. Then I'll lower the opacity so that I can just barely see it and it's not bothering me, and I'll click OK. And this is the part where I will start to create my little bee. Now, there's many ways to kind of do modeling, but since we're modeling in CAD software, we need to create a sketch that we can then extrude into a shape. But first, let me show you an easier version of drawing a sketch using the daisy. So the daisy, we're going to start by creating a sketch from the picture. And what I'll do is I'm going to use the spline tool. And if you've ever worked with Illustrator or any other vector program, it's very similar, except in this case, you draw the line. And as you're drawing the line, you kind of sort of press a little harder and hold, and it will create a node. So I can just kind of keep drawing and create these little curves with minimal effort. Once I get them all created and set up, I will then go back and adjust all of the node points so that I get the flower shape that I want. You do have the option to actually import a vector sketch into Shapr, and I will frequently do that when I'm working with something that I've designed maybe over an Affinity Designer. But for this project, I opted to just kind of create a doodle in Procreate, and since they're really required a lot more modeling versus vector drawing, I opted to just go ahead and create the sketch here in Shapr3D. It's fairly intuitive. I mean, I like the fact that I can, just move these nodes around and create the flower petals without too much effort. All I really need to do is just kind of line them up to the sketch. Once the daisy shape is complete, I just add a circle, and that's easy enough to do because the Shapr tool has a actual draw circle function. It also has draw rectangles and such. But then I exit out of the sketch, and now I'm going to create the shape, and that's very easy to do. All you really have to do is click on the sketch that you've created and drag up, and you can even be precise by tapping in what measurement you want. And this is very easy to adjust as well. I often will go back and change the thickness of whatever I'm working on as I kind of fine-tune things. So now I have my daisy, and it needs a hole for the O-ring. So I'm going to go back over to the sketch by hiding my shapes, and I can add an additional circle up here at the top for the little O-ring that's going to go through it. So I've added that. I'm going to get it in place, and I'll exit back out of the sketch once I have it where I want it. And what's neat about creating shapes in Shapr or any CAD software really is not only can you create these positive shapes like I did with the daisy, but you can also create modifiers or negative shapes. So I can actually tap on this circle, and by extruding it back through an existing shape, I create the hole that I need for my little O-ring jewelry connector. And I decide that, maybe the daisy needs to be a little bit thinner, and it's easy enough to modify the height of the material. So this is the way that I typically will do a lot of my 3D signs. You can also add materials over to the 3D shape that you created to help visualize the colors. This is a really nice feature. The number of materials that are available is somewhat limited in the free version, but most of the time I really am just looking for the color. So once that's done, I'm going to export it out, and I usually use the 3MF format because it will keep the shapes separate, and that'll be important down the line. Trust me on this. So I'm just going to name it and then export it over to my drive. Now let's work on the bee. Now the bee is a little more complicated, and you would think I would want to start by creating a type of cylinder or circle, but actually what we need to do is start with a rectangle. What we want to do is extrude a shape that we can then form into the honeybee, and curves are usually easier to do with modifiers. So what I found was after, a couple of different methods to creating the bee, I realized that the best method was to start with creating this rectangle and getting it sized the way I wanted, and then drawing where I want the stripes to be. Because I want each of these brown stripes to actually be their own individual shape. And that'll be important down the line. Now, I have grid snapping enabled so that everything kind of lines up nice and neatly, and it makes making sure my measurements are even much easier. I also will then draw a line where the curve of the honeybee starts so that that area will be easier to modify once I have the shape extruded. I know it sounds a little silly at this position, but when you see it visually, it'll make sense. So I exit out of the sketch, and now we are going to extrude and make this the rectangles that I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually tap on alternating rectangles. Now, the reasoning for that is that if I were to potentially tap on all of them, like I'll demonstrate here, and then extrude them up, it's going to make it all one shape, and that's not what I want. I want different shapes. So that's why I'm like alternating which ones get extruded first, so they all come up as separate shapes. And I use the same height measurement as the width of the bead just to kind of keep things a little bit symmetrical, and that's 14 millimeters. And I'm going to highlight the other portions of the sketch that I need. I have to zoom in to kind of get the little ones, and then I will extrude those up as well. Okay, so now I have the square version of my bee. So now we're going to modify it so that it becomes more of a cylinder. And the way to do that is by using the chamfer fillet tool. So what you do is you select the edges of the rectangles, and I'm just getting the longitudinal ones right now, and it takes a moment because you have to tap all of them individually. And once I have all of them, I'm going to pull with the chamfer tool, and as you can see, it creates a lovely cylinder. Radius is a 7, which you can see, which is half of what the width of the rectangle is, which makes sense when you think about the geometry. So now I have a cylinder, so we're a little bit closer to the shape that we want. What we need to do is round the front and back of the bee. And again, we're going to use the chamfer tool by grabbing the sides. And what's nice is you can do both the front and the back at the same time. So I'm going to grab it again and just pull the radius until it gets to the part where it meets all of them. And again, it's 7. And now we have this pill shape, which is the shape of the bee that we want. So pretty cool, huh? Now, to make this be a little easier to kind of understand and visualize, one of the things I'm going to do is actually color the shape of the bee so I can see the different sections. And to do that, I am going to use the visualization tool like I did with the daisy. So if I tap the icon in the upper corner and tap visualization, I can then add material. Now, there is a default material set already, which you can actually change the color on, and I'm going to change the color of the default material to a pretty yellow, something similar to the material that I picked out to print it in. And then I can actually drag and drop additional materials to other parts of the bee. So for instance, I'm dropping brown onto the stripes so that I can see the difference. And I am using a different material, but it doesn't really matter, because once you come out here, they're all the same texture and it doesn't really matter. So now I need to create the other parts of the bee. So I'm going to go over to my sketch and I'm going to find the stinger. And again, I'm going to create a new sketch, and this is pretty easy to do. I can use the circle tool to draw a circle of about 2.5 millimeters for the base of the stinger. And again, that's all you really need for just the sketch portion, because we're going to create a cylinder out of it and then modify it. So I've got the sketch created, I click on it, I hit extrude, I bring it up however far I need. And I'm thinking with the stinger, probably 3 millimeters will be good. And then from there, I grab the top and I kind of round things out a little bit. And I could actually make it sharp if I go the opposite direction. And since I want this to be a stinger that's kind of pointy, I'm going to go the opposite direction with the chamfering. And then I can click the seam that was just created and round it out to create more of a rounded stinger shape. And a lot of times it's just a matter of playing around with chamfering and filleting different spots. I hope I'm saying that right. Don't make fun of me if I don't. But that's really how easy it is to modify a shape and create even something that might look complicated, such as a little bee stinger, when in reality it's, just a matter of a couple of modifications. So I'm going to move it into place on my bee, and I really recommend moving one axis at a time. That way you don't get lost. Because remember, we not only do have an XY axis, you also have a Z axis. So moving things in 3D space is a little bit easier if you flip between different 2D views, which, by the way, I'm controlling by moving the cube in the upper left corner. So you can also rotate shapes and then move them into place like I just did. And then I zoom in to make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. Make sure he's just inside the little bee so I know that he's properly attached. And there you have it. I've got the little stinger. Looks good. Now it also needs to be colored, and I'm going to use that same brown material. So it's easy enough to drag and drop it in. And then I noticed that the stinger is actually on the wrong side of the bee, at least compared to my sketch. And I mean, I could let it go and, just use the other side. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just put it on the opposite side of the bee. And by doing, an easy way to do that is actually using the mirror function. So you tap the item and then you can tap transform and flip it over across an axis. There we go. And now I need to work on creating the eye. And I'm actually going to do that by creating a construction plane first off of a section of the bee. So you can actually create a new construction plane and then pick parallel to face. And then you can tap the face that you want the construction plane to be parallel to. And then it's been created and I tap done. And now you can see this plane that's sitting on the face of the eye. And my reasoning for that is I'm setting up so that I can actually draw the eye onto the bee. So creating a sketch essentially on an object, if you will. So once I go back into sketching, I can then tap the sketch plane that I want to work on and it'll zoom it in. And then I can actually draw the eye of the bee. And there's a line art function within Sketcher, so you have to make sure you get enough of a curve when you're first drawing. But that basically lets you draw a curve into a full circle. So since I'm doing these happy little kawaii eyes, I can just draw a curve where I want it, and I can even rotate the curve, get it into position where I would like it on the bee, just by moving it around. And once I'm kind of happy with the placement of the sketch, I can then offset the sketch that I've already drawn using the offset edge tool, which will create the second side of the eye with minimal effort. So I'm going to do it 0.5 millimeter, I think would be good for the thickness of the eye. And then zoom in, and then again using that same line arc tool, I can simply draw and connect the bottom edge and create this cute little shape. Once I've got the sketch finished, I'll exit out. And as you can see, I've got that sketch and it's literally on top of my bee. And that makes it really easy to then go in and tap that portion and extrude out to create a shape. So I could extrude upwards from the plane, but that kind of will pull it and there'll be some space in between. So what I actually do is actually like go down towards the bee, and because I'm going through, it thinks, oh, I want to subtract, but in reality I want to create a new body, and you have the ability to tap and modify so that you create a new body instead. And so now I've got this really cute little eye, and it's just a matter of really fine-tuning its placement. So I'm going to hide the sketch plane, that way I don't have to worry about it being in my visual field. Hide the sketch as well, and so I just have the shape. So I can tap the eye, and looking at it from different angles, I have the ability to just kind of rotate and adjust the angle that it was at. I can also kind of bring it down. I want it to be a little closer to the surface of the bee. I don't want it to be overwhelmingly extruded from the surface, in part because when you're working with 3D printing, if anything's got like a tip or an edge, sometimes that would require supports, and I don't want that. So I want to make it present, but as minimal outside as possible. After I've got it positioned, I'm going to again do the chamfer fillet tool, so it's kind of got a nice curved edge, so it's nice and smooth. So, and it's a very, very small radius, but it works. So there we go. We've got the eye all positioned where I want it, and really minimal effort. So I'm also going to use that mirror tool again to project a copy over the y-axis. So what I want to do this time though is keep originals on, so I'm actually making a copy rather than just moving it. So I have to scroll down and tap where that plane is for the axis that's moving, and it flips it over, and then I go in and color it so I can still see how my model looks. And I'm really happy with that. So we are getting close to done with the bee. So I need to do 2 more things. One being that I need to create a hole where I can put my jewelry wire. So I'm going to go back to the original sketch that I was working on. And I'm just going to go in the center and draw a little hole that I can then extrude up through the bee using that same negative modifier function. Easy enough to do, so I have the little hole. So the body of the bee is done. At this point, all we need to do is draw the wing. So again, I'm going to use the spline tool and just sort of drag and drop points to create the shape of the bee wing. And one of the ways I do it sometimes is just honestly drawing along the line and going back and again modifying the little angle points. Sometimes wish that this style of vector pen drawing, whatever you want to call it, node drawing, I think that's the word, was present in some other software, because this is admittedly, once you get used to it, a rather easy way to do the drawing. So I turn the grid snapping on and off when I'm trying to create more straight lines. But there we go. That's the shape of the wing, all drawn out as a sketch. And again, the same function of extruding it up to the thickness that I want it to be. Sometimes I go back and forth with what thickness I want and decide something in between. I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably how big I want the wing to be. And then, of course, I want the edges to be rounded a little bit, so I'm going to select all of them and again do the chamfer fillet tool. Get a nice little curve. And what is nice is, like, if you don't feel like you get as smooth of a shape as you want on the first time doing that chamfer fillet, like for instance, there still feels like there's these corners to the wing, I can actually take those newly created lines and turn around and chamfer them as well, so to make it a little more curved and smooth. So there's my wing shape. So now we need to get it positioned on the bee's body. So we start by doing the move process, and again, I recommend doing this with just seeing 2 of the axes and not 3, because that makes moving in 3D space much easier. And I rotate it into place roughly where I want it to, and kind of play around with the angles here a little bit, trying to decide. It's like, maybe this will work. One of the things you can actually do is move the rotating movement axis point, central point, down, and then you can sort of rotate it on that axis, which is nice. I was able to move it to center the bee and get the wing exactly where I wanted it to. So I think that's where I want it. I think that looks good. It's possible maybe that the wing could be a little bit bigger. So I probably need to maybe try and increase its size, and I can do that using the scale tool. The scale tool will let you increase the size of a shape. It will typically only do it on the 2 axes present when you're working, but I'm just going to scale it up in these 2 axes. That looks good. And from there, I'm just going to adjust the position of the wing, get it into the final spot that I want it to be on the bee, because then I'm going to take advantage of the mirror tool one more time and make a copy of the wing for the other side. So again, tap more, and then tap mirror, and then zoom in and find the square for the axis I want it to mirror over, making sure I keep the original on, and then tap done, and there I have it. I have 2 wings. And I'll really quickly throw on a different color just so I can visualize what the bee looks like. And we are all done modeling the bee charm. Looks pretty good. Nice and round edges. Now, I'm going to take the time to name all of these individual parts so I know what they are. And I do that because when I take the model over into the slicer, I'm going to be able to color them different colors, and it is way easier to color different parts of a model when they are properly labeled. Otherwise, you're clicking through and trying to figure out which one is which. So it's just good practice. So now I'm going to export B just like I did with Daisy Charm using 3D print and 3MF as my form. I'm gonna name it B Charm and export it out to my computer. So now we're over in Bamboo Labs, which is the slicer, and I am going to import my new creations that I just did in Shapr. So this is the board, the plate that's going to be in the 3D printer. And what I'm going to do is I am going to make sure all my settings are correct. You can see I've got P1S 0.4 nozzle. That's what's in my machine currently. There are some various options, but I usually use the 0.4. It's the standard. Sometimes I can use 0.2 if I want detail. And then I have my textured PI plate, which is the plate that I use. There's some other options, but this is the one that I have. Then you see you've got all of my filaments listed here. I have 2 AMSs, which give me a total of 8 color options. And I've got it loaded with a couple colors, including brown and my yellow. And you can see that I can click and actually change the color of the little icon. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It really is just for modeling, essentially. So Polyterra is what I'm going to work with, and now I'm going to bring in my model, and you can do that by going up to the file and clicking import. I'm going to import a 3MF. I'm going to go over to where I put my bee charm. I'm going to start with my bee, but I can also bring in my daisy here shortly. So it's going to load, and it says, hey, is this like, I don't necessarily know them. Is this in meters? And it's like, no. And then it's going to ask me if I should load this as an object with multiple parts. And you definitely want that. So we're going to click yes. And the reasoning for that is that because it is an object with multiple parts. And we scroll in, we can see all the different parts of the bee that I modeled in Shapr. So, and it's all loaded in. And it comes in on the first color, which is going to be the brown. So I need to color my model. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do this. One of the ways to do it is using the paint bucket tool and basically selecting areas of the model and selecting which filament you want it to color. But because we made this an object with multiple parts, we can actually go over here into objects and expand the bee charm right here. And as you'll see, all the different parts that we labeled in Shapr have now transferred over to Bamboo Labs. And this makes coloring very easy because now what I can do is I can actually select the parts that I know that need to be yellow, and then right-clicking and setting the filament to my yellow color. And ta-da! Now my bee is all yellow with brown stripes. So the only thing left then is to get the wings. So I'm going to look for the wings over here. Let's see, there's the left wing and the right wing. And I'm going to set them to my white Polyterra, which is in number 7. And there we have it. My bee is all colored and ready to be set up for printing. So now that I've got the bee in, I'm going to make sure it's scaled correctly. I can adjust the size of the bee using the scale function here on top. Now this is in millimeters and it's not intuitive to me measurement wise, so I often go back and forth and flip between the units to imperial so it shows me how big the model is in inches. So I'm going to make sure I select the entire model before I do any scaling. I'm going to go over here and it shows me the model is about 1.21 inches in length and then 1.06 in width. So I think for this model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to 1 inch in size. That looks good. Now, one of the nice things about them being all different parts is I can actually, say for instance, maybe I wanted the wings bigger, I could actually go in and select the wings themselves or any other part, say maybe like the eye, say I wanted the right eye and the left eye to be bigger. I could actually scale these parts individually as well. Make them look a little crazy that way. So you're not just limited to scaling the entire model. You can actually scale the individual parts and fine-tune things if necessary. For instance, if I were to slice this and found that the eyes were not picking up and they needed to be a little bit bigger, I could always come in here and do it that way. So I'm just going to undo that. So I'm going to go over and collapse my bee so it's a little less messy over here. And now I'm going to import our daisy charm that we made. So you can also do that by pressing Command I and opening it up. And it usually ends up kind of in the middle of the board. So I'm going to just move it out of the way so that I can see it. There we go. And again, it comes in on the first color. And we can see that it's got the two little parts here, the center and then the flower. And it did not see these. I did not have these in a folder, so they kind of came out as individual items, and that's okay. It's still, we can actually right click them together and right click and click assemble, and that will actually turn them into one object with two parts. I will just click this once and name it to flower. There we go, just for organization's sake. And now I'm going to set the filament for the center to yellow. And then the filament for the flower I'm going to set to white. Okay. So now we have our charms imported on our board. So at this point, we want to focus on getting things set up for the best optimization for printing and trying to make sure that we minimize the amount of material that we use and we get good quality prints. One of the things that we need to think about is how detailed we want these prints to be. Now, these are going to be smaller items, so I am going to want to make sure that I have high quality set, and I usually set it to 0.16 millimeters thickness. And I'm going to slice it and see what it generates, and you'll see it's generated the two shapes. And from there, I start kind of looking, make sure I've got everything finely tuned. You'll notice that it says I need a brim to keep the bee on the model, but it kind of came out brown, and I don't want a brown brim because sometimes I can't always pull it completely off. So what I need to do is actually change the order of the colors that come out of the machine, basically which is the first filament that it starts painting with. And I'm going to set it so that the yellow is the first one, because when I do that and I go to slice it, because the brim is a disposable part, it will just use the first color, and I have it now set to yellow so that it won't leave a brown rim at the bottom of my bee, which would be unsightly. So now I'm going to focus more on material, and I switch over to grams because that seems a little more practical, and spools come in 1 kilo size. So I'm looking at these amounts, and I'm noticing that the amount printed and the amount being flushed is a big difference. There's a lot more material being flushed and purged rather than being used in the model, and I really want to optimize that. I don't want to waste all of this material. So I'm going to go through and see what changes I can make. And I always take out the prime tower. I don't really know why. It's supposedly to help like with flushing colors, but I find it just wastes material, and so that already turns down the amount of waste, but I'm still pretty high. So now what I need to do is also focus on how much time and the number of layers. And you'll notice that this filament is going to change 132 times. And it does that because not only is it printing the bee, it's printing the flower. And what makes more sense is to actually create a separate plate and put the flower on the second plate and leave the bee on the first plate. Now over here I've got one flower, and if I were to slice it, you'll notice that drastically drops the number of times the filament changes, how much is flushed, as well as the amount of time taken to print. Now, part of that is because this is two separate parts in a model. And if I zoom in here, kind of slide my screen over a little bit so you can see it better. There, now we can see it a little bit better. Now you'll notice that we've got this scroller over here, and this lets you see through the slices that are being laid step by step. That's how you create a 3D print. And you'll see that we can actually see that the center is going all the way through, and that's because these are sort of two separate parts that make up one big shape. So this does result in, some excess waste that isn't really there, because we don't really need the yellow center all the way through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the shape of the daisy so that it's entirely white. So all of the parts are white. I'm going to slice it again, because there's another way to color parts, and that is by coloring it using the slice slider over here and adjusting it to where I want it to go from white to yellow, because this part is exclusive to just the circle, the center of the daisy, and it can be yellow. So I'm gonna change the filament, tell it at this point to change the filament to yellow, and I'm gonna slice it, and I usually miss it by one layer or so it's not uncommon for me to have to go back in and change it back out. So I'm gonna adjust it up to 10 and say put the filament change there, and then slice the plate again, and you'll notice that now we've got the daisies, same presentation, yellow center, and you'll notice the filament changes just down to 2. Our flushed filament drastically drops, our cost drops, and our time drops because it's not having to change filaments colors every layer. So that really adds to the efficiency of this print. What I can also do is put multiple copies on a bed. I mean, this is a tiny little print, and I can certainly have many more on here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and clone my little daisy here, and that's easy to do by right-clicking the daisy. You can actually, if you want to, fill the bed with copies. And it will usually take a moment because it has to think about it. And then, as you can see, wow, I can get a lot of daisy charms on this plate. That is a lot. So let's slice this and see how long it will take and what my numbers are. And it's going to take a few seconds to think about, especially with this number of prints. I'm sure I'll end up cutting the footage so it doesn't take nearly as long in the video. There we go. And now you can see, well, obviously I've got some that are too close to the border, but I'll fix that. But anyway, as you can see, I've got all of these prints. It's going to cost me $1.40, and it's only going to take about 5 hours. And that really that's how you optimize your prints. And this is, I mean, this is a lot of daisies, and this would be great if I'm doing it in bulk, but for this project, I don't really need that many daisies. I'm just going to opt for, I don't know, maybe 25, 26 of them. So I'm going to just go ahead and back up and clear out most of these really quick. And it ended up being 168 daisies, so that's a lot of flowers. So I'm delete them, and that leaves me with just the one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, again, take this one flower, and I'm going to right-click it, and I'm just going to select Clone. And by doing that, I can tell it how many copies I want. And in this case, I'm going to want about 25 copies. So I will put that in here. It loads them in, all nice and neat. And then I like to optimize my plate a little bit and positioning. And so I'll click this button over here, and that neatly arranges them onto a plate after thinking about it for a few moments. There we go. So all nice, neatly arranged. Slice it again. Make sure everything turns out okay. Looks good. It's telling me it's going to take a little less than an hour, and it's only cost about 22 cents to make 25, 26 of these daisies. Okay. All right. The daisies are optimized. So now, I guess there's 25. If I'm going to make earrings, I probably need one more copy. There we go. Reoptimize the way the plate looks because I'm a little OCD and I like my stuff all nice and organized. There we go. All right, so that's this plate. Reslice again. So it's set to go and I'm ready to run it. It doesn't change much of the time by adding an extra one, and the price is still pretty much the same. So now let's go over to the bee. So I've sliced him. We know how much it's going to cost to make this one. We know that we've got all these filament changes, and that's because it's having to change from black to yellow to white. And as I scroll through, I notice that the wings that I created, because these are all sort of separate objects, are showing up inside the model. And so the printer thinks that I want this inside parts here to be white as well, but it doesn't need to be because it's not going to be seen. So, and each time it changes color to white, it's one more filament change, one more purge. And so this is actually a problem that I need to solve back in Shapr. So let's go back to Shapr and see if I can fix this and make this a little more optimized. So back in Shapr, what I want to do is I'm going to basically cut out the wings that are stuck inside the model. And to do that, I am going to adjust the location of the wings just a little bit to make my life a little easier. I'm going to move them over so that they are directly in the center and don't go past either of the brown stripes. So that way I only have to worry about the portion of the bee that's in the middle. So what we need to do now is create a selection that we can cut away from the wings. So I'm going to select the middle sections of the bee, and I am going to join them so that they are all one unit. And I'm going to keep the originals on so that I still have my original parts. But I still have that part that I just created, and it's named Front Yellow Stripe 1. So what I need to do is I need to actually use this as a modifier to the wings. So I'm going to hide some of my extra parts, that way I can focus on what I'm doing. So we're going to use this as sort of the portion of the wing that we cannot see. We're going to cut away using this piece. So what I need to do is I'm going to select a wing, and then I'm going to select the part, and then I'm going to use the subtract function. And you'll notice that it recognizes I picked the wing first, and I'm going to use the center circle as my subtraction portion. And then what I can do is I can actually tell it to keep the originals of the negative parts. And by doing that, and I hide it, and oops, I missed hiding the other yellow stripe, but you can see where it has cut away the wing on the one side. So now it's perfectly matched up to the side of the bee, and it doesn't go on the inside. So that should hopefully fix our problem over in the slicer. So I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side really quick. All done, and then I don't need this extra part. The wings are where they need to be. Bring everything back in. Okay, so my model looks no different than before. Everything that's changed is on the inside, which is good for us. So I am going to export this again really quickly, and we're going to bring in this model over to Bamboo Labs. My slicer, I'm going to Command I to import. Oops, make sure I'm focused on the right app. Command I, import. There we go. I'm going to bring in Bee Charmed Fix because that's what I named my fix. And again, bring it in the same way as I did the first one. There it is. And I'm going to move them out of the way, and I'm going to repeat the same coloring process that I did before, grabbing all of the yellow parts, which again is super easy to do since I named the parts. There we go. I'm going to just find my wings really quickly. Where's that right wing? Oh, there it is, right in front of me. Right wing, left wing. Set these to white. There we go. All right. So now let's slice and let's see how things have changed. Now, I still have the one listed, but as you can see, as I scroll through, now that white section in the center has disappeared. It's not there anymore. So that will help with all of the extra purging and filaments once I take the bee that has the wings still inside it off the board. So I'll go back over to prepare, and I'm going to grab that bee. I'm going to hide him so he's not a problem anymore. And I clean my little wing menu up real quick. And then while I'm at it, I'm just going to go ahead and take the bee that I'm not using, and I'm just going to move him outside my plate and slice. And you can see big difference. A couple of filament changes are changed. It's faster. The amount of waste has dropped. So this is a much more optimized print as a result. Now we're still dealing with a lot of waste for such a small little guy because it's being purred 105 times for such a small model. So that's why it would make more sense to print multiple bees on one plate, because you're still going to have the same number of purges, but it's going to be distributed better. So I'm going to clone my little bee so that I've got 26 copies. I'm just going to pop them up on the plate. It takes a little bit longer because these are more complex models and it needs to think. Almost there. There we go. All right. Then I'm going to have it arrange the bees onto the plate and hopefully not crash my computer in the process. There we go. Now they're all neatly aligned, and so now we've got this slice, and you'll notice it's 11 hours and 20 minutes, and that's pretty good because before with just one bee it was almost a 5-hour print, and now with just a little over twice the amount of time we're actually getting 26 bees, so that's pretty good. Now I also noticed that the amount of material being flushed has come down a bit. and it is now less than how much we're being used for the model, but we can actually still optimize this a little bit more. And we optimize this by playing with the flushing volumes. So Bambu Labs always uses way more filament flushing than it needs to, and it uses this multiplier to control how much is being flushed. So it uses 1 as the default. I found that I can get down to like 0.4 and 0.5 and have it recalculate and still do pretty well. Now, it wants you to do a minimal of like 107 for the flushing amount, so I usually just go in and any number that's less than 107, I will type in really quickly and fill all of those holes. I'm not going to show you that, that's silly. And then click OK. And then if I slice the plate again, we'll see that this has changed the amount of filament being flushed by quite a bit. It's dropped it by almost more than half. So this drops my cost for 26 Vs down to roughly $2.92. It's an estimate. The total time has dropped a little bit as well because not as much time is being spent purging all of that extra material. So this plate can actually be printed, it looks like, in under 11 hours. All that's really left at this point is to send print plate and double check and make sure the colors match where they are in the AMS. And then once my printer is done with its current job, I will send it and print them.
And there you have it. That's how I create these really cute little items. Now, I know this wasn't a complete from the basics software in regards to how to use Shapr3D or even using Bambu Slicer, although I did try to break it down as much as possible. I do plan on making some more basic tutorials in the near future. In fact, I'm actually probably going to do it on sort of a streaming setup. So if you're interested in getting more tips and tricks, be on the lookout for when I list some live feeds. That way I can kind of show you what I'm working on and you can ask questions if you need help. With that being said, I hope you like this content. If you would like to receive information about the next time I drop a video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. And if you just kind of like the content and want to just share the love, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps the algorithm and helps me kind of get myself, noticed. I couldn't believe the overwhelming support that I got from a few videos ago with my Cricut work. And that's just kind of one of the many projects that I like to do. So this is another area that I really hope to be able to get out there and help people be more interested in. And with that being said, have a good week. Bye. Kit, you always pick the worst times to get into frame, girlfriend.